Welcome to All Tech is Human for our interview series. About every 2 weeks now, we are doing some exciting live streams where we're trying to tackle some of these thorny issues in tech and society. If you're not familiar with All Tech is Human, we are an accelerator for tech consideration and a hub for the responsible tech movement. Today, really excited for our guests that we have, Rana and Pamela. We're talking about increasing emotional intelligence in tech and ourselves. Rana el Kaliouby, she is the author of Girl Decoded. Actually, you have the book right here. I know we're on smaller screens. An excellent read, really talking about your upbringing as a nice Egyptian girl, as you call it, and really what led you into the field. And then Pamela Pavliscak, who you may know from previous AllTechIsHuman, such as our first Ethical Tech Summit that we had last fall. So, Rana, I'll kick it off to you to tell us a little bit more about your background and everything going on with your Girl Decoded book release.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good to meet you all virtually. So I'm Rana. I'm a co-founder and CEO of an MIT spin-out called Affectiva. Our mission is to humanize technology by bringing artificial emotional intelligence into our devices and our technology. And we're going to talk about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The goal is to really reimagine human-machine interfaces, but at the same time, because so much of our communication is mediated through technology, really increase emotional intelligence and empathy in the way we communicate with one another digitally. A little bit about myself. I am originally from Egypt. I grew up in the Middle East, studied computer science as an undergraduate, and then had the opportunity to go to Cambridge University in the UK to do my PhD in machine learning and built the first emotionally intelligent machine. And then came to MIT here in Massachusetts, thinking I'd be faculty, and very quickly realized there was a huge business potential. So started Affectiva about 10 years ago now. And we've been on this really exciting journey to bring this technology to fruition.
Yeah, and as I was reading in Girl Decoded, it seemed like that certainly kind of went against your upbringing in terms of the stressors of entrepreneurial types of pursuits. What have you learned so far with growing Affectiva?
Oh my goodness, a lot of, I think I've learned that the people side of it, the technology you can build, the product market fit you can figure out, the investors you can deal with. It's the people, like getting everybody aligned and on that same journey and having that same picture of the future that we're all kind of, progressing towards. I think that's the hardest part of running a company. It's also the thing that it brings the most fulfillment to me, just seeing people, embark on this professional and personal journey of growth. And it makes me really happy to be part of that. My anniversary as CEO, my 4th year anniversary as CEO was yesterday. So I was doing a little bit of reflection, and for sure, just the personal and professional growth of our team is the thing I'm most proud of.
Terrific. So Pamela Pavliscak, like I said, we've had you on previously for AllTechIsHuman, but for people that are first time interacting with you, could you tell us a little bit more about your work with kind of emotional AI?
Sure. So I guess I'm on the other side of things. So I'm not a developer or a computer scientist. I'm a designer. And my concern is thinking about how we design that layer between the technology and the people and what that looks like. And my background is sort of also kind of the flip side. I have my first graduate degree is in cultural studies, and my second one is in human-computer interaction. And so my whole background is in kind of the sociology and psychology of technology, and how we can use it to, create sort of a better emotional intelligence in ourselves, but also just the cultural and social effects of that. And so I teach emotional design and speculative design at Pratt Institute in New York City. And I also run a consulting firm that's kind of shifting now, but most of our focus at the moment is on helping all kinds of different companies integrate emotion into their design. And sometimes that's AI, sometimes that's other other aspects of the design they just need to pay attention to, because it's something that designers are surprisingly not that attuned to sometimes. So that's my story.
All right, let's start off with the kind of the elephant in the room, but I also want to mention that for everybody tuning in, this is a great opportunity to ask some questions, throw in some comments. We try to keep this very interactive. In probably about 10 minutes, we'll start incorporating some of your questions and hear what we all have to say about it. But I think the topic a lot of people are thinking about, since we're all sitting at home, is the impact of COVID-19. So I do want to say, for everybody watching, hopefully everybody is well and safe. We do recognize that these are dramatic, very serious times. But what I'll say with that is, we have seen our digital tools go from maybe a luxury to a lifeline, which obviously has brought up major situations around our digital divide, even in the United States. But what I also say is that how can we increase the emotion, or should we increase the emotion for a lot of the technologies we're having? So as a personal example, I'm probably on 3 or 4 Zoom calls a day, or webinars. And while I feel more educated at the end of the day, I don't really feel emotionally fulfilled. I know a lot of people are saying, well, geez, you're seeing a lot of people. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of people. Guess what? I can scroll through Twitter and see a lot of avatars and faces, but I still feel like it's bereft of any type of emotional capacity. And I think a lot of us are feeling like there's a missing piece. What would you have to say to that, Rana? Do you have anything with what Affectiva is doing around effective computing?
Yeah, and like you, I just want to acknowledge that these are very challenging and trying times for people, from a health perspective, but also economic challenges too. And I think we're all craving this human connection, right? We're socially distancing. I think a better term is physically distancing, but we're still craving this human connection. And if you dissect how people communicate, the vast majority of our communication is not in the words we're using. It's in the nonverbal signals. It's in doing eye contact, which is really hard to do on these platforms. It's the facial expressions, which constitute around 30% of how we engage. Our hand gestures, I tend to do a lot of these. Our vocal intonations.
So do I. That's why lately I'm trying to keep my hands down for our live streaming. So I'm not like chopping broccoli or something. You know?
But it's all these nonverbal signals that create this sense of human connection, this sense of empathy. And now that we've been catapulted into this universe where we're, working online, we're engaging with our coworkers online. That's how my kids are learning online. We're connecting with our families virtually. And so I think this idea of these signals being missing is really top of mind. And so one way our technology can really help, which is exciting, our technology uses cameras, just any camera on our device, to capture your facial expressions, your facial expressions of emotion, and we are able to aggregate that and visualize it. So, for example, right now, we're presenting to an audience. If we were live in an auditorium, we would see the energy in the room. We would riff off it. We would, you'd build on it because you're seeing it. And right now, outside of the comments we're getting, we have no idea, right? So imagine if the audience had their cameras on, even if we didn't see any of it, but the algorithm could detect anonymously laughter, engagement, leaning in, rolling your eyes, and aggregate that so that we as presenters and as an audience could get a sense of what is the energy of this conversation.
I did notice, yeah, Pamela.
I was just gonna say, and riffing off that, so like if you wanted to look at the design side of that, so okay, you could add that kind of intelligence, but then how we design that into the platform is really important. So one thing that strikes me about Zoom that might be particularly tiring to a lot of people and just weird is that the design decision was made to show yourself as you're talking to somebody else. So who are you making eye contact with? Are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at someone else? And the same would go for the choices we make about showing emotions, right? Are we going to aggregate it and show it continuously? That's a kind of stream of emotion we don't normally experience, and what effect is that going to have? Do we divide them into negative and positive emotions? I'd say like that's not really a true thing. All emotions have different, dimensions to them and could be positive and negative. All those are design decisions, right? So the technology can bring one piece of it, but then all those little ways that we try to integrate it into an existing platform and new platform really have a big impact on how we relate to each other and how we perceive ourselves.
Yeah.
Where would you say that the technology is? For example, since we're on the topic of Zoom, which is a hot topic since everybody has familiarity with it, there was a widely discussed op-ed in the New York Times recently. I know there's been a few on Zoom, but one in particular was, I think, was called "Zoom is Terrible." It was going right to the point on that title, and really what they were getting at is that, yes, it's showing us the face, but because everybody's internet connections are being throttled to a certain extent because of its overwhelming work from home, we're seeing it very stilted. So it's kind of looking like bad dubbing that you might be familiar with kung fu movies, and that can seem very frustrating. And the argument in that was saying that when you're looking at somebody's face, but you have a tough time reading it, that can be kind of distressing. So, Rana, do you have any thoughts on that, about where the technology is if we're trying to incorporate more faces with technology?
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, I'm very grateful for Zoom because it is enabling us to connect in these challenging times. So, but it's also really, it's a crude platform. There's a lot more that could be done with it. And to Pamela's points, these are all like tiny design decisions that are now getting amplified because like we're on Zoom calls back to back all day long. What I find really fascinating is this concept of Zoom fatigue, right? Because you are, when you're in a live meeting, I don't have to be facing you the whole time. I can look down, take notes, maybe I can walk out, like take a big, quick break and come back. But in Zoom, we're literally like stuck there the whole time. And I think that we're not used to that. And so I think this whole, how do we connect with each other online is going to evolve, both from a technological perspective, but also culturally, like what is acceptable. And I mean, for example, can you eat while you're on a Zoom call? Is that acceptable or not? Really? Should you really have a Zoom background, or is it more authentic to have like all of these questions? We're still figuring it out. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's I guess one of the questions that we're having. I'll kind of pull it up right here, right? And then actually, if we could kind of adjust slightly too, it seems like we're getting a comment. Maybe our heads are maybe a little high on the screen. Yeah, it looks fine on our end, but so we do apologize. I think we should be good. But what we're looking at there is would be interesting to see the impact of only showing the speakers and not the listener's face on active listening. So what do we think? I guess what I'll take from that is what are we going to learn from this experience with social isolation, social distancing, that is going to impact computing, I think, in the next couple of years?
I'll add a little bit to that. I think, right now, while the advances in technology are amazing, right, to be able to detect anything from your face and translate that and train it on a ton of data, hopefully really diverse data, that's an immense hurdle. But I think what I would hope that we would see in the coming years is more modalities, right? So now we have face and voice. I would one thing we're deprived of right now, depending on your situation. I mean, some of us are deprived of privacy and because we have our houses are full. Others of us are really deprived of touch and that oxytocin rush that we get from physical contact. And that may just be another signal that could be integrated along with maybe gestures and gait and things like that. So my hope is that more modalities would enter into the mix, and better models too. I mean, the model for Emotion AI right now is pretty crude and a little controversial, right? Because this evolutionary psychology model that can identify just a few emotions. It doesn't say like, oh, these are the only emotions we have or anything like that. Sometimes it gets, turned around to that, but it's kind of basic. And we know that there are a lot of layers to emotion, not just our physical exterior manifestation of it, but our memories and our cultural references and our social norms and conventions. And so all of that is just at a really I always tell like my students, for instance, I tell them it's like a little toddler right now, like a toddler can be like, I'm mad, not really extreme, but it's going to get better. And that I think that's one area that can be hopeful. But I don't know, maybe Rana can probably speak to the.
I love what you just said. I always give the toddler analogy because it is very early days. This technology, it's still in its infancy. Our approach is absolutely a multimodal approach, and the more modalities you can feed into these systems, the better kind of picture it'll have of the user. So I 100% agree with that. A few years ago, we kind of added a voice analytics team as well. And we are starting to look into gestures. I mean, gestures are really important, right? Like if I'm doing this, that's a meaningful gesture. Or like all of these gestures are very meaningful. So we're starting to look into that, but it's early days, and it is humans are complex, right? You can't reduce a facial, like I think, Pamela, what you were referencing is that there's this simplified version of the literature where smile equals happy, brow furrow equals angry, like this, and that's not how humans work. Right? I think we need to acknowledge that this is a complex problem. The models need to incorporate this level of complexity, but we are in the early days and we have a lot of work to do.
Well, that's the question I think we'll bring up right here about the range of emotions. And I believe I was also reading that in your book, Girl Decoded, about your kind of initial foray into this. And then I think the 6 recognized emotions expanding into 7, if I'm citing that correctly. And then how you kind of thought that there should be more kind of context in that. So where are we on kind of having the full, as I like to call it, the rosy bib of emotions? Where do you think we are in that process? If you're saying before that we're still in this kind of toddler stage.
Yeah, it is still early days. So what you're referencing is this particular literature that talks about the universality of these 6 or 7 basic emotions. So joy, anger, surprise, fear, disgust, and sadness, and contempt is sometimes added. And that is very controversial, actually. And the way we look at it at Affectiva is, first of all, we're interested in the building blocks of all of this, which are, what expressions are you making without attaching meaning to it, right? Mm-hmm. Are you raising your eyebrows? Are you squinting? Are you smirking? So we're now able to detect 25 of these different facial expressions. I think the literature has about 45 of these facial muscles, and we can capture the movement of about 25 of them. The more challenging problem is, how do you then map that to an emotional state? And to Pamela's point, it's not just emotions. Sometimes these are social signals. Like, if I smile now, it doesn't mean that I'm absolutely categorically happy. It could just be a social smile, a politeness smile. If I right,
does the face though act differently for a social smile versus a true authentic smile?
Oh, well, it does, right?
Yeah.
So you have the Duchenne smile, which is like the genuine one, and then I guess they call the fake one the Pan Am smile because it's associated with stewardesses and emotional labor. And so there's definitely a difference between those. But there's more to it than just, as Rana was saying, it's not, a facial expression doesn't actually equal interior thought and feeling all the time, and it's not a one-to-one mapping. I don't know. I look at it as like, this is a new input, a new signal that we don't have right now, that's missing, and we need to be careful with it and cautious and know the limitations. I think a big danger of it is saying like, oh yeah, now because we can see these movements on your face and label them as these emotions, you're going to be reduced to that, or we know the true you that you don't even know. And I think that's a big danger. Like, we don't want go. I don't think anyone who's in the field really wants to go to that place. Instead, the more kind of balanced approach would say like, oh yeah, this is giving us a little more context into what's going on.
Well, that's the question I'm going to bring up right now from Helen, and it's just looking at the validity of emotional AI. How should we think about context and use of this emotion in tech? What should it not be used for? We have so much on screen. This is like one of those comedies where you can add more and more things on the screen. But to that point, I know I saw in your book, Rana, that you do mention kind of really the classic Peter Parker principle, with great power comes great responsibility, that Affectiva obviously is dealing with something that is extremely powerful, that should and does make you more cognizant of the partners you choose to work with. So where are the areas that you think this should be off limits? For example, something that is coming up a lot since we are working from home is employee nudging software that comes up frequently. So what are you seeing on your end?
So when we started Affectiva, my co-founder, who's a professor at MIT, Ross Picard, and I sat around her kitchen table, and we acknowledged that there are so many applications of the technology, but we wanted to put in place some core values that depict where and when we would deploy this technology. And so we landed on just a small set of core values. First and foremost, opt-in and consent. So we do not work in industries where people don't know that this data is being collected on them, which means that there are some industries we just don't entertain at all, like security and surveillance, even though we could probably make a ton of money. Lie detection is another area because you're spying on the individual. Our thesis is we want to bridge the communication gap and build trust so that people do want to share their expressions. And then the one that you also kind of hinted at is this idea of what value do I get back as a user? And so I really believe in like rebalancing the power asymmetry. It's not about a company like spying on you as an employee and kind of nudging you. Maybe it's more about employee well-being, right? Yeah. Maybe it does give me that data, but it's because of it's for my own benefit. So who is the beneficiary of this data being collected and mined? And we're at the forefront of that. That's a core part of who we are as a culture, but also we evangelize very publicly that I believe this is where the industry should hold itself to, like the standards it should hold itself to.
And Pamela, do you have anything to add with that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I do think that a lot of that, again, too, is good as like a general value, so privacy, transparency. Then how does that really come into being in the products that we use is really important, right? So right now you might say, oh, well, we are notified of, that our data is being collected and we've agreed to it, but it's really been like a 20-page scroll through terms and services and we never get to review that. And we don't know what that looks like. So a lot of my research is not like your typical focus group survey kind of research. Instead, what I'll do is work with companies to build kind of like almost a little future forward prototype of something and then see how that works in real life and kind of build on the ethics from there, in other words, because I think it's hard for people to visualize. And I think when we're having ethics discussions too, we're often very abstract and high level. We all agree on these kind of core, autonomy and transparency and these big principles. But then when it comes to what that actually means when we implement something, that's a little harder. And so the only way I've really found to get good input on that from people is to build some version of it,
sure,
and have people try it out and interact with it.
Can I build on that? Can I build on what Pamela
Yeah.
said? And also, like, I think I saw it in the question regarding bias and emotion AI. So absolutely, like we all can agree that we need it to be, respect privacy and consent and transparency, but how do you reduce it to practice? And so in our world, one fear is that these algorithms end up being biased against a particular population or subpopulation. And there has been evidence that some of the facial recognition technology that's out there doesn't work on, say, women of color, right? And that's a function of the data that you're using to train these algorithms. It's not just about the quantity of the data, but it's also the quality and the diversity of it. So it has to have gender diversity, age diversity, and ethnic diversity. And also on the back end, like, how do you test these algorithms? You can't just look at a one accuracy score. You have to break it down by subpopulation. So we have reduced this kind of overarching theme of, oh, we want our algorithm to be fair and not biased, to actual, here are the 5 steps that every member of our team needs to follow to ensure that the algorithm's not biased. And then I think there's the team. Like, the more diverse the team is, the more robust the technology is going to be. So I think diversity the diversity of the team is really critical too.
Well, let's get down then to brass tacks with that. How, with Affectiva as the CEO, how do you go about increasing the diversity of your team?
We prioritize it. It's again part of the culture. We work really hard to ensure that we are tapping into diverse communities. For example, we had to cancel it this year, but we have an internship program for high school students because we believe that they are a very important voice around the table. So that's one way we incorporate diversity of age into what we do. We also, obviously I'm a woman in technology, and it's still hard to be a female founder in tech, and to raise money from a very male-dominated investment community. So I'm a big advocate of I'm involved in a lot of organizations that are helping advance that. And also, like, the way we interview, the way we post job descriptions, I think you can make it a lot more friendly, to a more diverse population.
Sure. I guess the next question I want to go into, and I see one from Kayla here that I'll bring up soon. When you think of the future and your interactions with technology, so I know, for example, with Girl Decoded, you're kind of going over your experiences of saying, wait a minute, why is technology so cold and abstract in the way it's designed? Shouldn't it be kind of more social and kind of responsive? When you look at the future with technology, with how you interact, what do you envision? I just say that because I wonder if when we look at the future, what our ideal future is, of whether we are thinking the same thing. So as a quick example, years ago, I think this is maybe in the 80s, cars used to have a voice back to you saying, the door is ajar. It turned out that people didn't really like that after a while, and then it became very, very annoying. So there was a certain part, and then we obviously know Clippy. I don't want to throw any more hate on Clippy, but those interactions seem to really get under people's skin. So with that in mind, when we're going about designing kind of this more interactive, if you will, type of feeling with humans and technology and AI specifically, what do you think the ideal kind of interaction is for most people?
I'm going to answer this like very, or actually, I would like to defer.
Unless you want Clippy back.
Oh, Pamela, I'm curious.
Yeah.
What's your point of view on that, actually?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think well, first of all, as somebody who's working a little bit in speculative design, I'll have to say, like, there are many possible futures, and I don't have one ideal future. But to me, sort of my guiding principle is, does it augment human capabilities, or does it try to automate and simulate those capabilities elsewhere? And I think I prefer it to augment us rather than simulate it, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's fun to have a cool robot companion or a chatbot that has a little personality, but we also love to be creative and use our imaginations. So for instance, this is why there are Reddit groups for, Roomba owners who are naming their Roombas Rosie mostly and assigning a personality because they don't have much there. And we naturally want to do that. And I think we do that with people in our lives as well, and pets. For sure. I know I narrate all of my pets. That's a whole other story. But but anyway, I think my goal is will it augment our own capabilities as humans to be more emotionally intelligent?
Yeah, I agree with the partnership lens. It's not a human versus AI. It's more of an augmentation, and I think there are opportunities. You can imagine how a conversational interface like Alexa, as it gets, you interact with it every day, it gets to know you, it knows your baseline. If you start deviating from it, if you're stressed or anxious or maybe even depressed, it can flag that to you or a partner, or augment a clinician, right? Like, because you're interacting with a clinician, say once a month. Well, what happens in the time in between? Maybe there is an AI chatbot or a social robot that is at home that can provide a little bit of coaching or help in the times that you can't access, a human support system. So there's a lot of augmentation.
Well, that's where I guess I'm a little surprised by everything going on with COVID. Obviously, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of attention around telepresence machines being used, especially for people with disabilities who can't attend school, maybe having the robot kind of go through. And that really, to visualize, if you're unfamiliar with it, watching is basically an iPad on top of a machine that's kind of zooming around. But right now, we have a lot of situations where people are sick and they're unable to be visited by their loved ones, their relatives, their friends. What do you imagine in the future, right? Would there be something different? Would there be more interaction with robots like I think it's Pero, like the Seagull robot? Like, is there going to be more push towards that type of interaction?
I'm not against that. I mean, I think we have other products, creatures, things in our lives that are non-human entities that we attach to and have conversations with or use as foils for our own personal growth. And I mean, if you're looking at psychology, I guess immediately Donald Winnicott springs to mind, and transitional objects is a big part of how we develop. So I'm not necessarily against it. I mean, I think where the fear comes in is like, oh, will that replace human relationships? Mm-hmm. I don't think it will. Honestly, I think it will augment human relationships and maybe get us to reflect a little bit on what it is that we value in those relationships.
Well, thank you. Oh, yeah, please.
I very quickly, I spoke to somebody yesterday. She's based in London, and she's on her own during this pandemic. So she hasn't really been seeing her friends or family. And she downloaded this app called Replica, which I have.
Oh, I know that. Yeah.
And she said, it's so interesting because she was super skeptical, but she basically loves it. And her replica is called Jay, and Jay will hold her accountable, and we'll just. It was so fascinating. And so I think social isolation is a real problem as we navigate this pandemic for many people, and technology can play a role in mitigating some of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, my replica's Pixel.
Well, I guess that's where I when I kind of lead the next question, I see for I think both of your work, you emphasize and Rana, I believe you use the hashtag human first, or I've seen that in a lot of your work. Could you unpack that a little bit? What do we mean by putting human first?
I think it actually is exactly what Pamela has been saying about putting the human at the center of designing, developing, and deploying these technologies. The technology in and of itself is absolutely fascinating and super cool. I'm a nerd and I love it, but it's not about the technology at all. It's about how is it helping us as people, not just be more productive, which is where a lot of the AI dialogue often ends up being, but more connected and more empathetic. And I think this is where this type of technology can really augment our emotional intelligence capabilities. And that's where I want it to go. I want this to be a very human-centric approach to solving the problem.
I think it can push people in the industry to put more focus on it as well. I mean, just speaking from like a design and kind of front-end dev perspective, there's not that much, there's a lot of attention to making things easy, calm, not frustrating, not confusing, frictionless. There's not much attention to emotion, even for all our talk about empathy.
Yeah.
We're not very attuned to that. And what I think maybe a secondary potential of this technology is that whenever you get a new technology, everyone's like, ooh, what's this? Let's try it out. And then, of course, we'll learn like, oh, yeah, it's not perfect. It doesn't do this, but it does do this. And it will push the industry to think about empathy in a broader way, maybe think about care, even further than empathy, and think about that sort of emotional richness that's kind of lacking in a lot of our platforms right now. They're really focused on like easy, productive, quick, and not so much on vulnerability and intimacy and human connection and those kinds of things.
So do you think as our technologies incorporate more emotional intelligence, and as we've seen over the last couple of years, we seem to humanize, personify these technologies, that brings up kind of an uncomfortable question around what then would our relationship with these technologies be? For example, go and watch it. Everybody gets entertained by Boston Dynamics, those incredible robots that especially like Spot the dog, I believe. But there's a video that some people bring up where basically, I don't know who the person in the video, but he kicks the robotic dog. And you as a individual, or me as an individual in this scenario, you feel sorry for a robot, but a robot doesn't have emotions. So you would think that I wouldn't feel sorry for it. So I'm curious, because I know there was maybe a Japanese study where they're looking at kids who beat robots and what that really meant. Do you see there having to be major changes, societal changes with our relationship with technology if they are incorporating a lot of these very human features?
I mean, I think we already do that. In Girl Decoded, I talk about Jibo, which is a social robot that's spun out of MIT. And we've had it for a number of years. We were one of the very early customers, and it's right here actually, still. But the company ran out of money last year, and it was very distressing for my son, because my son had, Jibo the robot was his friend, and it was a very different relationship than the one we have with our Alexa, which again, my son, who was, he's 11, he basically said, Alexa is very transactional. You ask it to do things, it does it for you. But Jibo's your friend. And he would play these like fun games with Jibo. And he was in tears when I basically shared with him that the company's shutting down and our Jibo's going to stop working. It's basically dying. And it just made me think, like, we change our cell phones all the time and we never attach that much emotion to it. I don't care if I upgrade my phone, but it was really emotional with Jibo. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of this relational component with our devices. And again, I'm curious.
I think that's a good thing. I mean, honestly, that can have an impact on sustainability when you think about it, right? Because what are the things that are in our lives that we don't want to replace, that we have trouble disengaging from? We all have heirlooms. So that's an exercise that I do a lot in workshops, is think about, well, what is it that makes an heirloom? What are the qualities of it? And sometimes it's not that the object itself is so interesting, but it's all the meanings that are attached to it. So, in this case, people are grieving over Jibo because he has certain qualities, but also kind of the place that it holds in your life and the memories that are associated with it and the interactions that you had with it. So I'd love to see us get to a place where we felt that way about more of the objects in our lives, and we didn't throw them away, and we fixed them and attached to them a bit more.
When we look at a lot of the humanized kind of technologies that most of us interact with, people normally think of Alexa and Siri. I guess connection that a lot of people can make is we tend to humanize them with female identities. If we think about our interactions with technology, not only us changing the technology and informing it, but the technology changing us as humans, the more kind of McLuhan type of process or thought. What do you think about that idea, is there a danger that we could perpetuate stereotypes with the continued use of heavily or predominantly female identities with these social technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there is. I mean, women have been associated with emotional labor kinds of jobs, and so probably it seemed like the natural or whatever development to do that. I have 3 daughters, and I feel pretty heartened that we are moving away from gender binaries just in general. And there was an interesting project called Q that was an assistant that was not gender binary. I think it won a Cannes Lions Award. And I feel like I always suggest this in our research teams, like, let's step away a bit from pure demographics in our thinking, and these ideas of gender and even other demographics that define things, and think really broadly about what it means to be human and what it means to humanize things. And I think it goes beyond that. So I'm hopeful that we'll move beyond that, but I do think it's an unhealthy pattern to be in, and especially as a parent to 3 young women, I don't like to see it.
And Rana, what about yourself?
I think these technologies are often mirrors of society in interesting ways. And so it's an opportunity to kind of take a step back and really think about, do we want to be perpetuating the biases that exist in society in these technologies? And if the answer is no, then we have to be very mindful and thoughtful about how we design these systems. But also, like, you can imagine how, back to the children, the study where they were, being rude or towards, like, you can imagine, like, if a kid like consistently asks Alexa to play a song or order a product, Alexa can say, you know what, I'm not going to do it until you say please, or you were really rude, like, maybe you should apologize. Like, what if, right? Like, that's interesting, because then
they did that, actually. Yeah, I know that was an issue that Amazon had, but that brought up its own kind of uncomfortable questions, because then there was a pushback on that to say, well, wait a minute, who's Amazon to tell us how to raise children? But at the same time, realizing that this is a delicate issue.
Yeah, but there's also the fact that kids sometimes do power experiments, even really little kids, with their toys, with other things, and I think eventually, we'll all have to learn, like, where are the safe places to explore those maybe not so nice feelings, but still kind of play that out without repercussions, and when does it go too far? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't think anyone does, but that will just be something that will naturally evolve as we go along, I think.
It looks like we are kind of wrapping up here with our 45 minutes together. So I just want to go to each of you to get any quick final thoughts, and also where people can stay in touch with you, and maybe a little bit more about your respective books as well.
Pamela, would you like to go first?
Sure. I guess I would say final thought is that I don't want us to be afraid of some of these new developments, that instead we should certainly be cautious, but also be a little bit creative and experimental and try these out. So probably the best place to find me now is pamela.is, because I'm transitioning from one company to another at the moment. And there you can find out about my book too, but I did not stage this at all, but here, of course, obviously. So, and you can find me on Twitter at Pamela.
Terrific. And Rana, what about you?
I think my final thought is going back to human first. Like, let's humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. Lots of exciting things to do there, and lead with empathy, especially during these times. And if you are curious about my book, it's called Girl Decoded, and you can find it at all the book retailers, your favorite book retailer. And if you do end up reading it, please do share what you found that resonated with you.
Terrific. Well, Pamela and Rana, I want to thank both of you for this great discussion. I know we need more time with this, so please stay in touch with us. Pass along the video, and then you can stay in touch with AllTechIsHuman at alltechishuman.org. So thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.